They have a business or a mature operation up and running and providing them with resources. So a lot of what we are tasked with is helping a business owner access capital. And there's a number of ways to do it, but it all begins with planning and understanding your business at a very discrete level. And there is a process to raising capital, there's a process to applying for debt. And the gentleman that we have speaking to us on this subject today, I have known before we both had gray hair, and we've operated in the same circles for a very long time. And so I have the pleasure of being in the first Angel Capital Group meeting in Knoxville, Tennessee, where Eric was pitching.
I pitched, yeah.
So we've traveled the same path for a very long time. So this morning it's my pleasure to introduce to you Eric Dobson. He is the managing partner of the Community Equity Partners and Angel Investing Syndicate and the Chateau Venture Fund II, a technology-focused capital fund. His career spans the last 31 years working first in geographic information systems in both state and federal government, then to entrepreneurship, and ultimately to venture-style investing. He's founded 3 companies, advised dozens, and led investments in 40-plus companies. Dr. Dobson has served on a number of board of directors and advisors with for-profit and not-for-profit companies. He holds a BA from the University of Tennessee, where he is also a lecturer of entrepreneurship in the Tickle School of Engineering. He received a Master's of Science and doctorate from the University of South Carolina. He now applies all the hard work earned, knowledge, and experience from these ventures and exploits to technology venture investing. Please welcome Dr. Eric Dobson.
Thank you. This is on. Good. If you don't mind, I know this is going to irritate the camera guy, but I'm going to range a bit around. Sorry. I like to use the whole stage. Stephen, thank you so much. And he's right. I was a fuzzy-haired scientist working for the government, became an entrepreneur, not really understanding what that even meant. Founded 3 companies. One was very successful, one was a success, and one was a total disaster. Not in that order, thank goodness. But so I learned what success looks like, I learned what failure looks like, and after my last venture, I was invited by the investors, one of the investor groups, which is actually here in Knoxville, it was called Angel Capital Group then, to join, and I think their assumption was I could do diligence on other companies because I knew where the bodies were buried, I knew what to look for. And that actually turned out to be true. So began working in 2012 with Angel Capital Group, which later went through some mergers, and we now end up with the name Community Equity Partners. But I took it over in 15 and started really moving what was, I call it an angel syndicate. It's basically a multi-city angel group. So we have multiple groups in multiple cities that all look for really exciting high-tech ventures here in the heartland of America. And then I'll tell you more about why that's important in a second. But anyway, so started moving that model much closer to venture capital. Because if you talk about angels, and we'll talk about it in here a little bit, angel investors invest their own money in ventures. Sometimes they get together in angel groups so they can make group decisions, but they all individually make those decisions to invest, and they invest their own money, typically directly, or in my case, we aggregate the money into a holding company, and we invest in that company so we have more concentration of resources and more concentration of responsibilities and tools, things like that. Venture investing, basically you get people together and you pool their money into a bank account in some way, shape, or form, and then you have general partners who actually make the investment decisions on behalf of those people. That's the primary difference between angel investing and venture investing. One is a very active model where you're engaged, you're meeting the companies, you're interviewing them, you're making a personal decision to invest. The other is a managed fund where you have professionals make those calls for you. Okay, so I do both. Basically a managing director of both the Community Equity Partners, which is headquartered here in Knoxville, and then Sheltowee Venture Fund 2, which is a collaboration with two other companies, Allura Capital and the Sheltowee Network in Cincinnati and Cincinnati and Louisville, respectively. So I'm going to jump right on in. I get the question constantly, how do I access capital? How do I get capital for my business? And I tell people right up front, it's a lot like trying to sneak up on a porcupine from behind. You do it with a lot of forethought and planning, okay? It's not something you go at, casually. You don't take a running start at it. This is a thought exercise first. All right. See if I can. Come on. Go. See if you can make that advance. Behind the back. It's on. Are you going? No, get rid of that. Escape, do it. Bingo, now try. Okay, got it. Okay. All right, so I probably bumped it, my fault. All right, so let's just talk a little bit about it. I mentioned my history as a fuzzy-haired scientist, and then an entrepreneur, and then now an investor. So, cut my teeth, raised about $12 million for those three companies. And again, some were successful, some were not. And that's the challenge of this whole industry, and the reason that accessing capital is so difficult. We're going to talk a lot about that. Joined the investors, took over, said that, really started figuring out, when I took over, I started looking at, we actually did a Silicon Valley deal. It was a total disaster, because deals that leak out of Silicon Valley to someone in Knoxville, even a professional, quote unquote professional, means that no one inside that city wanted it, because they've got plenty of capital, they've got plenty of deals, they've got plenty of entrepreneurs. And so we realized very quickly our path to glory was not in going to Austin or Boston or Silicon Valley or Miami or wherever. We figured out very quickly what we're good at is very, very technical founders here. They're engineers, they're whatever, it doesn't matter. Mostly very technical people often have some skills gaps, and we started trying to we start filling those gaps and turning them into entrepreneurs. So we take inventors and turn them into entrepreneurs. And then we basically work with those now the newly minted entrepreneurs, and most entrepreneurs are made, let's face it. There's some natural entrepreneurs, most are made. Then we take them and we advance them through our angel process, where we invest 2, 3, 4 times with these companies. We see how they take capital, we see how they spend money. Are they taking my money and buying revenue, which is what I tell them to do. Okay, I'm giving you money, go buy revenue. Figure out how to do that. And at that point, once they reach that inflection point where they're ready to scale, we have this venture fund that I mentioned earlier that comes in and sort of basically takes them and drives them to exit. So it's a multi-stage process, but we call that investor readiness. And in fact, actually, the Oak Ridge National Lab had us build a learning management system for their Innovation Crossroads program, specifically for this transition from inventor to entrepreneur and to being able to even speak to investors. Because most investors don't tell you this, but as a business, you get one shot. This is not an iterative process where you say, I want your money, here's my idea. I say, I like that, but do this and come back. Unfortunately, investors, there's too many deals out there. There's too many opportunities to dwell on marginal opportunities. And that's one of the real challenges here in this industry. All right. So our venture fund, so the angel fund right now is the first one, the angel group. We've invested about $14 million. We have about a 16.5% annualized return, so that's better than market. That's about to get a lot better, by the way. We have 13 exits pending in the next 3 years. That's been 8 years worth of work finding and sort of curating these companies to get them to the point, we call that exit velocity. We've done the heavy lifting to get them from startup to exit velocity, and now we're helping them exit And that should return a substantial amount of capital. My angels are going to be very, very happy over the next 3 years. And now it's the venture fund's turn to do that. And so part of my job right now is getting that venture fund completely capitalized so I can put more money in these companies and drive them to exit. All right, so we were in Facebook pre-IPO. That was a different deal. Obviously, I said we had one Silicon Valley. Apparently, it was two. We were in the Facebook IPO. We did very well with that. It was about a 10x return on that. We've had a couple of 1 to 2x returns. We've had 3 2x returns, 1 5 and 1 6x return. So that's actually we've had 6 exits of companies between 2 and 6x our money back in the last 4 years. So the model is working, and I'm thrilled to death to tell you that, because taking over in 2015, I didn't know what I was doing. I just thought this is the way it ought to be done. And so I took over, and that's what happened. All right, so Knoxville Group, we have 12 Knoxville investments. 2 of those have already exited. One was a 5x, one was a 6x. We have 6 pending exits for Knoxville companies. Okay, so it's working, and it's working here. That's the other thing I need to say. And we've talked about the venture fund. We've already made 14 investments out of that fund, and we'll finish capitalizing it hopefully this year. It's a challenging year because the election cycle and things like that have big impacts on capital access. All right, so let's back up for a second and talk about why capital access is so difficult. All right, so this is a standard natural distribution curve. Most biological systems, in some way, shape, or form, exhibit something that looks like a natural curve, okay? So we would think these are humans running companies, okay? It's selling to humans. It should mimic a biological system in some way, shape, or form, and we should have some small percentage that fail and some small percentage that become, the Facebooks, so they call them the unicorns. And then somewhere in the middle, we're going to have some middling returns, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6x, whatever it is. Well, unfortunately, nothing could be further from the truth. 90% of startup companies seek capital, only 10% get it, for starters. 90% fail within 5 years, 95% fail within 7 years. So every time I make an investment, I know there is a 95% chance that my investors are going to lose their entire investment. Let that sink in. Would you take those odds? 95% failure rate. If your doctor said, there's a 95% chance you're going to die if you take this drug, would you take that drug? No, of course you wouldn't. No, nobody in the right mind would. Okay, so that establishes another criteria of angel investing. You have to be a little bit crazy to do it. All right, so here's the reality. It's a power curve. 1% of the companies return something like 99% of the value. And so what we're looking for, and this is the challenge for small businesses, especially here in the heartland of America, we're looking for those 1%ers that can return many times our money. And it means largely, hair salons, restaurants, even small tech companies aren't really investable under a venture style model. We'll talk more about how you can in a second. But at least we know the problem now. Okay, so here's the other challenge. Ideas to success. This has been tracked since the 1970s, roughly. It's about 3,000 ideas to one venture that makes $20 million in annual revenue. And this has held pretty well over the years. So 300 patent disclosures end up being 150 applications, 112 issued, which is actually a pretty good percentage. 9 of those projects go on to angel funding, and angels continue on with this, but 4 actually get to venture capital funding. 1.72 companies launch successfully, only 1 makes it to something that would be a respectable exit for an investor. So one thing you can say is ideas are ubiquitous. It's execution that matters. That's another way of looking at this. All right, this is a really ugly graph, and I'm so sorry I haven't time to redo it professionally. Stephen just asked me to do this yesterday, so I had to cobble some slides together real quickly. So I apologize for that. But if you sort of look at how this model works, we've got there we go. Companies form and they go after what we call the innovators. These are the people that identify as they want to be on the cutting edge, they want to embrace change, they want to adopt new technologies. You go after them first because they're a willing audience, okay? And what happens here, which I call the zone of irrational exuberance, is companies essentially believe they're worth a lot more than they are at the beginning. They've got a great idea. They've got some kind of traction. They've been told that this is the greatest idea since indoor plumbing and all this kind of fun stuff. And they tend to overvalue themselves at this point. When they start to try and develop and sell products, that's when we see what I call the trough of realization, that they're not as valuable as they think they are. And that's where angels typically get involved. We come in and we help them cross what's called the chasm of death, because trying to jump from your innovators who are willing to work with startup companies with, the products may have warts and hair on them, they're not perfect, they've got bugs, but they're willing to work with you. Those people aren't very closely related to the next step, which is your early adopters. They want to work with you, but they're not willing to work with raw products. They want some sophistication, some polish to them. And that is the zone where typically companies fall off. They're good at working with their innovators, especially technical founders like we work, but they're not good at jumping onto more mainstream, into more mainstream audiences. We help them get across that. Our job is to sort of drop kick them over the chasm of death and get them over to the point where actually venture capital funds will invest here once they get over here. And what you'll see is this, where the risk curve meets this value creation curve, and by the way, the risk curve is a misnomer, that's really where venture capitalists get involved, okay? They wait till most of the risk is out, there's still risk available, but you should notice that the angels go almost completely at risk, okay? These are fundamental risk takers, calculated risk takers, but risk takers. Eventually, obviously, the company creates, and the reason they do is because the greatest creation of value is on this curve, okay? Most companies are going to try and exit on the way up on this curve, so what we're trying to take advantage of is the value between 0 and exit, and then other companies take advantage of growth in the marketplace when the product's very sophisticated and very polished. And eventually, they all retire, and there's no value left. But again, so this risk, this is what we call the risk premium. That's why investors want so much money back. It's not like we can live with 1.5 times our money back and be successful. We need to have a company that can return 5 to 10 times our money because of that failure rate. I got to invest in 20 companies to guarantee I get one that really returns capital. Okay. All right. Let me keep on going here. So I talked about angels and VCs. There's also something called crowdfunding. You probably heard that term. And literally the SEC created it, let me back up for a second. 1929, big crash. Big crash caused not in small part by fraudulent private equity. People were creating companies and selling shares for companies that had no assets underlying the actual shares. So suddenly you had people holding shares in companies that were worthless. And that was one of the things that was immediately outlawed when the crash happened, was sales of private equity. So unfortunately, the challenge you got there is that no private equity means no startups. And from 1929 to 33, basically the economy stagnated, not in small part because nobody could invest in startups. There were no startups. There couldn't be small businesses. There couldn't be medium-sized businesses or large businesses growing. So 1933, we come in and we get what's called the Regulation D, and it's an Accredited Investor Act, which says if you're worth $1 million or you have $200,000 in annual income, you can invest in startups because you're wealthy enough to be and sophisticated enough to lose your money. Okay. Fortunately, in some ways, those numbers didn't change until 2008. So we just kept minting, and by the way, in 29, that was fascinating, fabulous wealth to be worth $1 million. In 2008, it meant you had a nice house. Okay, so long story short, the rules said you can approach investors, but you must have a substantive relationship with them. You can't just go out and stand on a street corner or go on the internet, as the internet evolved, and raise capital. And so the crowdfunding took care of that. They came back in and said people should be allowed to raise capital on the internet. Prior to that, if you stood in any kind of a public audience and you said, I want to raise $1 million for 10% of my company, you were at that moment technically a public company. And you had to go through the whole registration process and all the headaches of doing that. And Sarbanes-Oxley had a lot to do with complicating that issue. It eliminated what we used to call the small cap IPO. Well, We flash forward, SEC is now driven, just as Congress created the SEC and drove it to do the original work in 1933. We see this package come out in I think it was Jobs Act of 2010, 2012, can't remember, that created crowdfunding. They said, no, you can, but you've got to work through these specific regulatory processes before you can sell shares on the internet. Great. That is now angels invest about $25 billion a year. Venture capitalists invest between $25 and $60 billion a year. And the crowdfunding is about $5 to $6 billion a year right now. So it's a niche, but it's a very big niche. And that's about 60 to 70,000 companies get invested annually out of that budget. So the crowdfunding is meant to address that. One of the reasons the SEC did that is because they said this is another means of people investing in more, quote unquote, lifestyle businesses, local businesses, breweries, nail salons, things like that, that would be another avenue. So that was one of the goals of crowdfunding. Some of that's being realized, but at the end of the day, most people are still trying to drive crowdfunding towards a more venture model, but we'll deal with that later. Angels, I talked about, angel groups, we talked about. Angels get together to share experience and knowledge and invest. And then we've got what we call super angels. So these are individuals that are wealthy enough, they sort of act like venture capitalists. Okay. There are a number of wealthy families in town. We know their names. So in some ways, they either have their own what they call family offices, investment funds, or sometimes they act individually to invest. The different angels or venture capitalists may form funds, and so when I talk about the Shelby Venture Fund 2, that is a true venture fund. We pool capital and then we make the decisions on the investments there. The crowd, as I said, is growing. It's growing in every year, and it should be an incredibly strong force, I think, in the next 5 years. And it is. We heard the word democratized in the last session. It's democratizing the investment process at this point, and so you can invest in. Anyone can invest, by the way, through crowdfunding. Not in the Regulation D33 rules, only accredited investors could invest. And there's a lot of shifting winds. What we see is capital sort of undulates between investing in early stage and later stage companies, depending on how things work. Right now, we're back in a cycle that's moving back to early stage. We've been away from that for several years. And what you'll see is a lot of money gets invested in early, and then it kind of walks along investing in these companies until they exit, and then they go back and start the process over again. So you kind of see this cycle over time of investing in early, mid, late stage companies. You just have to, and that can be challenging for startups if you're not in one of those cycles. It's very challenging. The other thing to understand is the diligence process that we go through with these companies, because our challenge is we have to become the ultimate inside traders. And it's legal, okay? On the private equity side, your job is to get under the hood and to figure out if this company is a 1%er or a 20%er, okay? We got to figure out, we need to understand your financial projections. We have to understand your business plan in depth. We have to understand contracts you've written. We have to understand how you've taken capital. We have to understand everything about you and your business. All right, so there are three major buckets that we study. First is structural, and that's, is your corporate structure fine? Your contracts written right? How did you take capital in prior rounds? That has a big impact on my job. What we call a capitalization table. Who else is invested? How much do they own? We talk to them as well. And of course, your deal terms. On what terms are you raising this capital? What kind of share price or valuation are you asking for? And is that reasonable? Then there's the execution stage. This is where we really review your product, your business plan, financial projections, your management team, we do background checks. We have to do all that kind of fun stuff. And very rarely does that turn up anything, but the one time it did, we were glad we did it. Experience, obviously, how many times have you done this? Are you a repeat offender? And of course, your IP portfolio, we have to analyze that in depth. And what we really create is a risk profile for your company. So we come up with, here are the big picture risks. Are we willing to deal with those? Which ones can we help? Which ones can the company mitigate? Which ones can we help mitigate? Which ones do we just have to accept? And then that's pretty much what it is. And then, of course, market entry. This is the third one. Do you have a willing, are you solving a real problem? Do you have a real base of customers? Are they willing to adopt your product? Are they early adopters? Are they innovators? Where are you in this process? Your competitive landscape, because as I tell, I do teach at UT, I teach a class in the engineering department, and I did that on purpose because, as I said earlier, we work with a lot of technical founders. So my job, I thought, you know what? I got invited to teach this class. I thought, how better to learn to talk to engineers than to get them at their larval form and sort of help walk them through the process so they're prepared for this. But the competitive landscape, I always tell my students, your competitors want your clients worse than you do. Always assume that, and you'll never be wrong. But we have to understand who's out there, what are they doing? Are they venture-backed? We have to do research on them. One time, gosh, we had 2 competing companies one time, by sheer accident, apply to us at the same time. And we actually got to sit there, and it was very difficult, obviously, for reasons of confidentiality, working with these companies, but we got to peer inside both these companies and figure out which one to invest in, which one had the better model. It was a fascinating exercise. And of course, the commercialization potential, how much can you reasonably expect to generate revenue over what time frame? Because then we've got to figure out what your exit strategy is. Are you going to be acquired? Are you going to do an IPO? There's always a thought that this is a cash cow. It's going to return dividends. I've never seen that work, but people tell me it does. 99 times out of 100 companies are acquired. 94 out of 100 companies are acquired by bigger companies. About another 5-6% of the time they do an IPO. At least so far for us. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about this. When you start raising capital as a true startup, true concept stage, company, you'll typically go to what we call friends, family, and fools, the 3 Fs. Because they love you, they know you, they're willing to take a risk on you, and if you fail, they're not going to hold it against you. There are some true angel investors in that space that really, really like that. Most of what's happened now, at least since the great credit contraction in 2008, is there's whole accelerator networks that have popped up, and we're blessed with a couple of them here in the region, really blessed. Jim Biggs runs one of them at the Knoxville Entrepreneurship Center. It's one that we love to work with. The accelerators sort of picked up that role of helping entrepreneurs get to the point they've got a business plan, they can start to talk to investors in their own language, things like that. So it saves us the problem because we don't have time to train entrepreneurs. I say we do investor readiness, but it's hard. We can't go 0 to 1. We can go 2 to 7 or something like that and help them out. But we don't have time to go from the fundamental, the fundamental first lift. And the accelerators do that. They actually do that. So we got that. There's usually a seed investment. This is where professional investors start to get involved. My angel group, this is where we get involved. Companies usually pre-revenue. They don't have any money to show for it. They've got a lot of potential. They've got a business plan. They've probably got a product. They've got a customer that's willing to pay for it at this point, but they're all potential at this point. They're almost 100% potential. From there, we go to what we think of as what's called a series investment. This is the professional rounds. And they start with A and they go through whatever. I think a H is the latest one I've ever seen before. We rarely invest past a Series C. Most companies learn to exit by then. They figured out how to return capital. But there is, after that, we do see mezzanine, larger rounds. Companies, we've got one company right now that's going to raise $20 million in their next raise. Okay, that's technically a mezzanine round. Most of these series are anywhere from 3 to 12, 15 million in size. Okay, and then of course there are larger venture funds that will invest hundreds of millions of dollars in your company, and then, of course then there's what we think of as we start to exit. So there are companies they're in the private equity companies, and what they do is they buy your company to run your company. Usually there's some kind of golden handcuffs for the founders, and what they do is they're rolling up companies or they're doing some kind of aggregation so they can then flip these companies later or live off their cash flow. Acquisitions, basically this is usually some kind of strategic acquirer that comes in, so it's a Boeing or somebody that needs your technology to serve a military contract or whatever, and they buy your company. And they usually, again, the founders usually have some kind of golden handcuffs, but you're no longer critical. You should have set your company up so that someone else can run it, and they typically do. Oops, sorry. And that could also be, stop it, there you go. There's also a merger option. A lot of times you'll see companies, several of them, merge to create a larger company that they can then exit at some level. And finally, the IPO. IPOs haven't changed in a long time. They're still there. There's still a registration process. What we've seen over the last several years is one of the things you can go through crowdfunding now to become public. Okay, it's called a poor man's IPO. That's the new small cap IPO that I said Sarbanes-Oxley destroyed. And then you've got something now called a SPAC, Special Purpose Acquisition Company. And essentially what that is a private company, startup, growing, scaling startup, merges with a public shell to become public overnight. Okay, it's the cheap way to go public. The one challenge with especially IPOs out here in the heartland is that the old rules haven't changed. You've still got to have somebody willing to trade your shares on a major exchange or your IPO will fizzle. So that's one of the big challenges. That's why we have investment banker networks and things like that. Someone that basically says, yes, I want some money out of the deal, but I will start trading your shares as soon as you go public. So we keep them off what they call the pink sheets. It's got to stay above $1 per share, and we start trading in the public, and that's where all the excitement happens. Now, there's always a big question, where do the banks fit in? One of the challenges for startups is a bank is going to require, and there's, of course, there are SBA loan programs, which are fantastic and do serve part of this function. But the first thing is, if you want to get a bank loan, you've got to have collateral. And you typically have to have cash flow. So most startups don't qualify for true early stage bank financing until they've got 3 years under the belt of some kind of operations with cash flow, often with collateral, things like that. So it's very challenging for startups to get bank financing. There is a thing called venture debt, and there's a company here called Three Roots Capital that specializes in this, and they are willing to loan money, granted at higher interest rates, but they'll loan for, to small companies for growth. For instance, I don't know if Grady Vanderhoeven's speaking today, but he's the founder and CEO of that company. Great organization. So there is a debt path, but the argument has always been, if you look at equity is very expensive capital. It's called expensive money because I invest at $1 a share and later you pay me back at $50 a share. You've paid a lot of money to me for the use of my money in the early stage. Banks are much cheaper if you think about it, but you're constantly servicing the debt, which is very difficult for startups, very, very difficult. So that's why it's very hard to get that. SBA loans do impact that because they'll often underwrite 50%, up to 90% in some cases of your collateral. So the bank can loan, so you only have to provide 10 to 50% of the collateral for your loan. Okay, so that's so very important programs there, but that's where banks fit in, and it's usually more of a financing, inventory financing or something like that as the company begins to scale, rather than a true operations loan like we might think of. Okay, so I offer some of these companies as evidence that the model is working. We've got this company, General Graphene here. They are the largest producer of a material called graphene in the world now. They basically came to us with a great idea and a business plan, and this was the pitch. They said, we're going to build a machine that's never been built for a material that a Nobel Prize winner says can't be made for a market that doesn't yet exist. How do you feel about that? Okay, and shockingly enough, people said, where do I sign up? Okay, so but brilliant founders. It was the founder of this company. It was his sixth startup. 5 of his companies were either still operational or had exited and made a lot of money. So we thought, first of all, it was his opus. So that tells you something about how we look at these things. It's either it's a founder bet or it's a company bet. In this case, it was a founder bet. But we funded their startup completely. They wouldn't be here without us. And now they're entering several different markets with their material. And that will become, I think it'll be a household name in the next 5 years, at least in the advanced material space. Lirio is another company here. They do essentially the science of nudging. They work with large healthcare systems, and they figured out how to incredibly precisely target marketing messages to patients for preemptive health, mammogram, increasing the number of mammograms that are done every year, things like that. They've proven they can double to triple the response rate of their outreach, and it's all based on AI, by the way. And so they just signed 7 major contracts last year. We expect them to exit probably through IPO in the next 24 months. This company, great little, hyper-local media company. I think they just came to Knoxville recently. They're already under contract to be acquired in 30 months. Pneuma Respiratory, this is a great company, the smart inhaler. And so what they do is they have a smart device that makes an optimal particle size and releases it at the optimal inhalation point in the cycle and delivers nothing but a pure distilled water and pharmaceutical into the lungs. Okay, so they've perfected this. They're going to be in 150,000 pharmacy locations this summer. That company took 8 years to get there, and they're going to do an IPO next year. It's going to be incredibly good for us. Ascend Manufacturing, another local company, they have created a 3D printer that expands throughput by up to 5,000%. They can actually print stuff cheaper than you can do injection molding now. And that's a major revolution in 3D printing. And there's materials they can print that nobody else can print. So we think that's going to be a really successful company. They're already talking, the largest 3D printer company in the world is already talking to them about acquiring them. Greasezilla, cool name, interesting logo, but what these guys do, they figured out how to turn the most heinous of fats, oils, and grease, the more animal-based greases, into biodiesel. And so they're basically, I won't say they're unique in the market, but they're pretty close. But they've got a very scalable process for turning this stuff into biodiesel, and they're about to be acquired by, they got another 30-month contract buyout with a major oil company. EDP Biotech, Knoxville company, an AI-based blood diagnostic for colorectal cancer. They're in discussion for acquisition. They may do a SPAC, and the reason I'm there, they may do that in the next 2 years, but we think they're going to be probably somewhere between a 6 and an 8x return on our money. And by the way, that's going to be at least a 10. That's a 3. That's probably going to be a 5. That should be about a 15, probably about a 5, probably 3. This company, Sense, has a stroke detection medical device. Great company. We think they're about to get their FDA approval. Lightline Medical, they figured out how to use visible light to sterilize catheters. It's easy to use infrared light, but infrared damages both tissue and the catheter material. Visible doesn't. So they've got that patented. This one I just dearly love, and this is sort of a passionate investment too, but it's a great company. They have a non-pharmaceutical opioid treatment, withdrawal treatment. They literally, you put on a headset, it stimulates the nerve here behind the ears and alleviates all symptoms of withdrawal within minutes. And if you use it for 2 to 3 days, you're completely through so you can go through withdrawal without the pain and the agony of withdrawal, which causes recidivism. All right, and here's the thing that really tugs at your heartstrings. They're now going after an FDA indication for pediatrics because so many children are being born with opioid addiction, and it's a terrible way to come in the world. Anyway, this one, rechargeable, this is a Knoxville company. Basically, they have a rechargeable battery chemistry. This company already has $1.2 billion of purchase orders. They're opening up their first manufacturing. In fact, I'm joining their board now. Next month, I'll be a board member, and I'm going to their ribbon cutting. The next facility is going to be here in southern Appalachia someplace. I'm desperately trying to get them to put it here in the Knoxville area. They've pre-sold 3 years of production already, sitting there, just waiting to go. They're start production here in about a month. This is the one I really think is incredibly relevant to today's discussion. Just for some context, I was in my graduate school years, I actually worked between the computer science department, the biology department, the geography department, and was using artificial neural network models to look at climate change 30 years ago. And so found some fascinating things, but I've been using artificial neural networks, which is the underlying technology for these large language models, for 30 years. So I've been watching this tech and expecting this day. It still shocked me when ChatGPT came online. All right, so Authentrix This was a fascinating story. This guy, one of the California refugees that moved here during COVID, met him through Oak Ridge. He calls me one day and he says, I got this phenomenal idea. And I've already filed a provisional patent on it. I need 100 grand in 90 days and I can build a software package to do this and I can have a client. I was like, after I stopped laughing, because that never happens. That's insanely fast. Also, possibly by an order of magnitude. He said, no, I think I can do this. Sit down with me. We went through it. I said, okay. So we actually put 100,000 in the company to start it. And we never do that, by the way. We're never the first money in. But he had a really compelling argument. What he figured out how to do is you've got the input layer where data goes in. You've got the output layer where the solution comes out. This middle layer is a black box. It adjusts itself to replicate a known answer based on a data set. He figured out how to analyze the hidden layer and determine exactly how any piece of information coming in goes through the network and what impact it has on the output. Now, that's interesting from a technical standpoint, but when you start to think about it is, A, it's an intervention mechanism because AIs go awry all the time. And they just trash them and start over again. Or one company even told them, I think it was, they'd stumbled by accident, their AI had stumbled on the classified information that had to destroy the AI. So they couldn't just back out that piece of data track. The other thing, obviously, it's an intervention mechanism so we can avoid some of the existential questions. But the most important thing is right now, all the important data are sitting behind paywalls. Industry associations, medical journals, things like this. There's a staggering amount of really, really, really important information that can't get into these models because they don't have a means of paying for it. And they're scared to death about the intellectual property leakage we talked about. So this is actually an attribution model that could open up, if you're willing to do this, yes, you can train your AI, you're going to pay royalties for it, just like the music industry, but you can pay royalties back to the original intellectual property owner. So it's a monetization scheme for AI that really makes an important change. So they're doing another round of capital right now. We're putting more money in the company. We think that's going to be a really fast growth exit, and it's already patented. So these are companies this is what we look for in companies, some sustainable competitive advantage in the marketplace. And that's another challenge for startup businesses, understanding how unique your solution is and how sustainable that unique advantage is. All right, I'll keep moving on. Sorry. I think I'm at the end here, then we'll take some questions if you want. Fuzzy-haired scientist, that's why I gravitated to the tech space. I think you can probably figure that out. My investors come to me for tech deals because that's what I do. I'm good at tech and I enjoy it. Investors take a huge risk and expect huge return. This is the challenge for accessing capital. You've got to be, I can tell you that when we get about anywhere from 250 to 1,000 applications for funding a year. And that's one of the reasons I want to use AI to help me screen those things because I don't have time to read 1,000 business plans. You can probably see that. But we'll see 80% of them are not appropriate for us for some reason. They're either not ready, they haven't done their homework, they're just not mature enough for us, whatever. 80% of those get swept off the table in minutes. Some are just, we have to just screen out from our website. The other 20% we spend about, we'll then spend anywhere 15 to 30 minutes with each one of those in that 15% category. And we'll get that down to about 5% that we think are really interesting and have potential. We'll usually work with them on, interview them, pitch them, do something. And that gets down to the 1% that we actually invest in. So we literally shoot for, and that's still 10 to 20 companies a year that we invest in. So it's still a 1%er's game. It's incredibly competitive to get those kind of resources in your company. All right, so angels are catalysts for the community. This is the other thing I found, because we entrepreneurs are incredible people. They're changing the world, they're doing amazing things, and we love them. It's easy to love an entrepreneur. It's very hard to love a deal. Very hard to love a deal. So one of the challenges here is having a group of people that stand up and say, yes, I'm an angel investor. I am willing to take risk on you here. If you will form your company here, I will take a serious risk on you. That's a bond with the community, and it changes the community. And that's one of the things that I've been trying to build, and we're doing better and better at it. in Knoxville, Nashville, Louisville, Kentucky. We've got a couple more cities we're moving into. But it's building that base of people willing to stand up and self-identify as investors. Because otherwise, how does a startup company find an investor? Unless they're willing to say in some public forum. Otherwise, you're just trolling coffee shops and looking for people driving Mercedes. How else do you find them? So it's a real challenge, real challenge. But these people are willing to say, I'm an investor, I'm here now, and I'm willing to take a risk on you. And we're trying to build a stronger community here in this region. Just understand the hurdle to get this money. It is not an easy thing. It is very challenging, and it requires a lot of homework. Okay, we have to have 5-year financial projections. We have to have detailed business plans. We're going to look at everything you've ever done, both in this business and before. And one of the challenges, obviously, is we can understand a business fairly easily. It's a lot of work, but we understand. Understanding the entrepreneur is one of our biggest challenges, because you're the unknown quantity. We love you, but I would say 99% of the failures I've seen in our portfolio, all team related, all founder team related. Bad chemistry, bad planning, uncoachable, things like that. Things we look for now much more closely, but most of the failures are team related, and that's the one thing we can't control. So anyway, that's kind of my story, and I'm sticking to it. I think that's summary. That's the last page. So if you got any questions, how much time do we have? We up?
5 to 10 minutes.
5-10 minutes. Happy to take questions if you got them. Yep.
In any part of this process of contacting what are the top absolute don'ts by the person contacting?
What not to do when contacting? That's a great question. If you ever say the words, "If I can only get 1% of this market, I'll move to the Caribbean and retire," I'm going to laugh at you. That's a circular file question statement. The big thing is, entrepreneurs want to talk potential. Investors want to talk risk. So if all I hear from you is the potential of this business, my first question is going to be, if we continue the conversation, is tell me about the top 3 risks and how you're mitigating them. Because I'm investing in risk, you're creating potential. So that's a do and a don't. Make sure you talk up front about, here are the real risks of this business, here are the real opportunities, and here are my mitigation strategies for making sure that we avoid pitfalls. Maybe that's a board member, maybe that's maybe it's use of AI. I don't know what that is. But the other thing is, obviously, professional investors do not experience fear of missing out. We're not FOMO people. We're very strategic, very calculating people. So do your homework. I mean, if I say, let me see your pitch deck, your business plan, and your 5-year projections, you better have them. And you better have them there at that moment. Because if you don't, I'm going to say, call me back when you do. And like I said, you really only get one shot at this. So if you haven't done your homework up front, you're probably not going to get the attention, or it's a much tougher argument to make when you come back. Oh, I've now done all that stuff I should have done before. So it's doing the homework up front and making sure that you can convince me, because you have to convince me you're a better than average bet. You have to convince me that you're a 5%er, not a 20%er or a 50%er. Okay? What else? Did I answer your question? Yes. Thank you. What else? Anybody raising capital in the audience? Nope? Okay. What's that?
The SBA has now said you can use crowdfunding as part of your equity
Mm-hmm.
or a guarantee. What do you see the progression of crowdfunding over the next few years? I think it's going to be more prolific.
Oh, without a doubt. Yeah, the question is, what's crowdfunding look like over the next 5 years? Without a doubt, it's going to grow. It's going to be much more prolific. But understand, here's the challenge. And it's a double-edged sword with crowdfunding, because it costs about $25,000 to $50,000 to field a successful crowdfunding program, because you've got to build just like any business, and this is the good part about crowdfunding, it forces you to build a marketing plan and a marketing outreach program from the very start, probably before you even have a product, to be honest. That's a very healthy thing for a company, but it also means to get to that point for you to do all the homework, to create, and you may have to hire, you may end up hiring marketing companies to help. You're going to spend about $25,000 just to get a campaign launched and successful to get $50,000 to $100,000. Okay. The other double-edged sword is if you run a crowdfunding campaign, you come to me, and you've successfully, it proves that somebody wants your product. Great. You've validated. You've taken a big question you check that box off. Customers want my product. Great. I'm tickled to death. If I look and find out you ran an unsuccessful crowdfunding campaign, it's equally negative. That means I know nobody wants your product, or you did a bad job marketing. Either one of them, it's a deal killer. So, good? Okay. Any other thoughts, questions? Yes, Jim?
So you mentioned that you'd like an AI tool to do some of the screening of your applications.
Yep.
You also mentioned the diligence process that you go through. It's very expensive. Do you imagine a point at which AI can do a better job of selecting
The question is, could AI do a better job than me at doing this? Absolutely. And I am working on that problem right now. Actually, no, we do. Right now, we're still focused because so much of this, entrepreneurs want a personal touch. Investors want a personal touch. This is still a person-to-person industry. I always tell people invest in people in markets they like and understand. That's the formula for getting capital. Okay, people, markets like and understand. I can do a lot of the automation on the backside and take away some of that, especially the repetitive stuff that we're just looking for structural issues. I can train an AI to do that. In fact, we're literally talking about that right now. What I can't do is the person-to-person, even though the large language models I know have very, very convincing personas, I don't think we're ready to move beyond that true person-to-person contact for this industry yet, mainly because people want to be heard. So, does that answer your question? Yep. Any other thoughts, questions? Yes.
So I saw a demonstration of an AI software that actually gave investors, it was a list of investors that small businesses could look at. Can you tell us any more about what you know about that?
There are marketing lists out the wazoo of accredited investors and family offices and venture capital funds. Those have been in spreadsheet form for years and years and years. So, I mean, just having the key for adding value to that is understanding where those investors invest and what industries and in stages, things like that. So I think there's some value that could be added there where you're basically saying, here's where I am and here's what I'm looking for and figure out. We actually, part of the work with Oak Ridge, I wanted to give a highly technical founder a clear map of how to get from, how to know who to talk to. And so we looked at, there's a technology readiness scale, which was built in by NASA in the 60s. And it basically goes from 0 to 9 sort of concept to ready to retire. Steve Blank, I think is from Stanford. He came up with a business readiness scale to match it, 0 to 9, pure concept to, ready to retire ready to retire the product. We came up with an investor readiness 0 to 9 to match it. And so you can say a specific investor invests at this level of technology development and this level of commercialization is a better way of looking at that business scale. And this is where you are on the investor readiness scale. You can actually create sort of a map, and that correlates to who you ought to be talking to. So there's another company that we're supposed to be talking to next month about hybridizing our models to do exactly that. So we can have a mathematical matching system between startups and investors. Yeah. Anything else? Oh, you're welcome. Great conversation. Any other thoughts, questions? In that case, it was a pleasure speaking to you, and feel free to reach out to me. I'm eric@cep.team. I don't really care for that domain, but that's what we have. So feel free to reach out anytime, and I should have put it on the last slide, did I? No, I did not, I'm sorry. I usually do. But anyway, sorry.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
That's awesome. Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, I think we're moving to lunch.
No, we have paper consultants.